When I first saw Glory Denied, it was such a incredibly visceral experience for me that I immediately knew I had to bring it here.
When we're exploring contemporary opera, we are really looking for pieces that have a global theme through a very personal story.
I had always wanted to write an opera. And when I found this book, Glory Denied, by Tom Philpott, it had a real resonance for me.
The piece spoke to me so much because while this is Jim Thompson's story from decades ago, it is still a story that's going on today.
The libretto, or the story for Glory Denied, is actually taken from a book by the same name, written by Tom Philpott. It is not fiction. This is what really happened to these people. He met with Thompson. He met with other returning vets to really delve into what it was like returning from the Vietnam War, not just the experience they had overseas, but what happened to them when they returned here to the United States. So many things changed while these young men were gone. VCRs were developed. The television underwent a huge expansion in people's homes. Radio, the type of music had changed while these men were gone. So reintegrating into society was a conflict for them, in addition to any scars they may have brought back with them.
Glory Denied is relevant in so many more ways than just about being a POW story in Vietnam, which is what it's about. We still have troops coming home, men and women, that have horrible post-traumatic stress syndrome. We have a higher rate of suicide than we've ever seen in our troops coming home. There's a real toll on these people that are going for 2, 3, 4, 5 deployments before they're released. The piece spoke to me so much because while this is Jim Thompson's story from decades ago, it is still a story that's going on today.
Many of my friends and colleagues, they've written sensational operas based on pre-existing novels, familiar novels, and they've had great success and done wonderful work. But I knew that wasn't going to work for me. I wanted to write an opera about real, living, true people. And further, I wanted a subject where no one is all good and no one is all bad, because I just don't believe people are like that. So the ambivalence of these people really attracted me. And then when I thought back to my memories of that era, the 1960s, the turbulent 1960s, I decided that ambivalence of that time I wanted to capture in music.
Glory Denied is part of Opera Unbound. Opera Unbound is exactly that. It is, we feel unbound to tell a traditional story or any kind of story in any particular venue.
The set is a very bare, basic set. It's a couple of platforms with a few chairs and tables, but that's it. This set was designed by Richard Kagi, who has worked with us in a number of capacities. He designed this minimal set because the action has to take place in multiple places very quickly, has to take place across multiple time eras very quickly. So the basic set allows the actors to be in different places by using some lighting changes, using some very minimal projections.
It is also really exciting to be a company, and very few of us get to do it, that works with a composer and a librettist and starts with a story and a blank page, and together we weave together these beautiful stories and these songs, and we tell stories that we know that demanded to be sung.
When Glory Denied was originally composed, it actually had an intermission and split the piece into 2 parts. But as we've talked further with both the composer and our director, we all felt that this piece really needed to be done in one stretch. So there is no intermission in this production. It's about 90 minutes long, but we really felt it was important not to interrupt the flow of the action, the flow of the dramatic story, and the emotional buildup that this piece has. If you have an intermission, you have to reach a point, and then you kind of have a relaxed period, and then you have to kind of start all over again. This continues that build to a very powerful climax, and without a break, there's no relief. We all have to go there.
What Fort Worth is doing is really unprecedented. And I guess that is why, in a comparatively short time, it has become one of the most respected companies in the country. The structure of Glory Denied is a little bit odd.
In my preparation for Glory Denied, I had two characters with 4 characters in the opera. The way I had to combine the 4 into 2 throughout the entire piece. How they matched, how they didn't match, what information they had, what information they didn't have, was my biggest challenge directing this production.
I think that the composer was really brilliant when he decided to make this opera with 4 people, so that there is an older version and a younger version of both characters in the opera.
You have this younger version of the man and this older version of the man, and when you have them both on stage at the same time, sometimes singing the same words, you get a sense of the person as a whole rather than just one side of his life. You get this whole human being.
There are the young Alice and Thompson, who recently married. Thompson had just gone off to war. They are, like many young people, and when they're 19, 20, 21, filled with the possibility of what may become for their life.
Younger Alice, it's been a difficult character because she, in many ways, is sort of the brainchild of older Thompson. For the purpose of the piece, she represents who he saw his wife as while he was going through what he was going through.
Then we flash forward to another decade. At least 10 years have passed since he has been in the war, been captured, and spent 9 years there. So then we come and see what has happened to them after all of this has happened. And they are completely different people.
I'm playing the role of older Jim Thompson. He was the longest held POW in American history. He was captured in Vietnam and held in captivity for 9 years, 5 years of that in solitary confinement, 4 months of that in a cage that was 2 feet wide by 2 feet high by 5 feet long. So he had quite a harrowing experience. And the impact that that had on his life and those around him cannot be overstated.
Of course, Thompson, obviously, having gone through what he went through, had to have been a changed person, but this isn't just his story, it's also what happened to Alice. And how do you deal when your new husband, has been gone for 10 years, you don't know if he's dead or alive? How do you move on? She chose to move on and create a new life for herself. And I mean, you can only imagine then the conflict when the two of them come back together and how that happens.
At one point, he says, "I forgive you." And she straightens her spine and she says, "I don't care about your forgiveness." And in the wrong hands, the wrong actress, the wrong singer, that would come across as so callous. But at that moment, you realize what a victim that woman was with 4 babies and no husband that she thought of. I mean, and the two of them staring in each other's eyes and both realizing simultaneously how much they lost.
I think she's a character that's very easy to become the villain of this show. And I'm thrilled to get to play a complex character like this because there's no way to actually be able to understand what she also went through.
I think being part of a dual role is really challenging because before you arrive and start working on the piece, you never know what the other person is going to do with it and what direction they want to take it. And luckily, I think Caroline and I have really similar ideas about her, about Alice, and the two sides of her, the older side and the younger side, are different, but there still have to be those threads that continue as a through line for the character.
The cast that Darren has assembled is stunning, and the technical people, the director and the musical director are just fantastic. Much of the libretto for the opera comes from the actual statements of the people involved. Tom Philpott's book, Glory Denied, is an oral history. So it is their actual statements, and much of the libretto is just taking those statements and putting them in an order.
The interesting thing about Glory Denied and Tom's music, his music's incredibly evocative.
Music has that incredible gift that it enhances and focuses your emotions.
There's a catalog aria that really details all the things that have changed while Jim was away as a prisoner of war. All these, the great thing about this piece that takes place during the Cultural Revolution. And the Cultural Revolution was hard enough for the people that were here. I can't imagine leaving before it started and then coming back right at the end.
Stagflation, confrontation, angry
Pill popping, one-stop shopping, polyester, wife swapping. Turn on, tune in, drop out.
American composers, by and large now, are embracing this wide variety of styles.
It's interesting how the composers are really pulling all of these disparate types of music that they probably heard growing up and making this classical style opera.
A friend of mine, a very fine tenor named Paul Sperry, gave me a bit of advice. He said, if you're writing an opera and you're going to spend years writing this opera, just remember, if you want it to have a life, to go on, it has to have excerptable arias. Arias that people will enjoy hearing, arias that young singers will take to auditions. He said, if you don't have that, it's going to die. So for that very selfish reason, there are tunes in this thing, particularly in the second act, which people can walk out of the theater humming.
In Glory Denied, you'll hear a lot of familiar type music. It does have influences of jazz and rock, even though it may not be overt. There aren't electric guitars. There aren't that kind of thing that some contemporary composers use. But what you will experience is the naturalness of this.
When you combine that ability to focus your emotions with a wonderful story, you have a work of art that is genuinely compelling.
With our hypermedia and all the things that we have, it is so easy for us to forget that these things are happening. We don't see them on the news anymore, but they're happening. And I want us to go in there and remember, again, those people that are coming home who have given up so much that we might have so much.
There's so much beauty in repertoire from the 19th century, but beauty didn't stop then.
I am incredibly passionate about contemporary pieces and pieces that are being written today. It brings to our community people and places and theatrical productions that are about real life things that we're dealing with today.
Something that is brand new, that is a story that people can relate to in English. I think it puts the audience at the edge of their seat just as much as the performers at the edge of the stage.
So if an opera company is producing year after year, Carmen, Bohème, Don Giovanni, things like that, which they should be doing, but that's all they're doing, then they're doomed to be lost in the annals of history.
If opera doesn't present contemporary works, if companies let new pieces just fall by the wayside, opera is going to become a museum, a dead museum.
The gift of contemporary music is that the choices are all there for you to make. There is no set of standards that people are expecting to hear. You know, I get to make all my own artistic choices, and to have my first professional debut to be a role where I really feel like I can craft it and make it my own is a really special experience so far for me.
I tend to do a lot of brand new operas, and that is actually my favorite kind of opera to do, because I think it does put everybody in the room sort of on the same playing space, and I think it makes the audience that much more excited to see something that we're all kind of experiencing together.
Contemporary music is different in the fact that, from a story standpoint, there will be people listening and watching who lived through this event.
Every veteran that sees this is going to see this from a different way. Every family member of a veteran is going to see this in a different way.
If people leave the theater and don't like this opera, blame it on the composer, because it won't be Fort Worth's fault. They've done everything to ensure a sensational production.
Today, by the grace of God.